We have the pleasure to have with us Professor Jurgen Bast, who is Professor of Public Law and European Law at Gießen University. He is also visiting here at the University of Tuscia for 2 months. Jurgen will be tomorrow speaking at the migration conference about the impact of the new pact and especially of the border procedure, which is the focus of his keynote speech. So my first question to Jurgen would be to tell us something more about this procedure. What is the border procedure?
First of all, the pleasure is all mine being at this wonderful place in the forthcoming conference. The border procedure is actually one of the key elements of the new legislation that has recently been adopted by the European legislature. It's one of the core ideas what should be different from the past. Many things has improved or changed a little bit. That's actually one of the new things. The general idea is that certain classes of asylum seekers should be kept at the close proximity of the border, be it the land border or be it in the Italian case, sea border. So people should be prevented from moving on, not only prevented from moving on to other EU member states, but also from moving within the state where they actually reside. So they cannot choose their place of residence while their asylum application is being processed. And that's not something which member states can choose or not to do, but rather the EU legislator requires all member states that have such a border to put this system in place.
And in fact, this procedure was already foreseen by the existing legislation, and yet it was optional.
That's right.
Now it becomes mandatory. So the outcome is the one that you were suggesting. What are the problems arising from this new mandatory procedure applied on several categories of asylum seekers?
Well, first thing obviously is the selection of which asylum seeker are kept at the border, are forced to reside there, and which one can move on within the country. The selection has strange selection criteria. Actually, it matters the statistical chance of nationals from that particular states where they come from, how this type of application has been processed before, what the chances of getting asylum are. 20% on average, something like that. So it's not the individual situation of the person. That's not decisive, but rather a more abstract categorization. But the main thing, I guess, is, well, coming up with the expectation that these people should stay put. Many people would actually have an incentive to move on, and then you have to apply some kind of force, implement sanctions to enforce this thing. And accordingly, either member states actually use detention, so to real force, then it would be a burdensome procedure, and therefore the question could be asked: is it really lawful in terms of the human rights, which prohibits arbitrary detention, to use that abstract criteria to put persons in detention?
Yeah.
But more generally, even I would argue that there is actually a human right to freely move within the country of residence. That also applies to asylum seekers. That will be up to the courts to decide whether my legal argument will be accepted or not. It's derived from the European Convention of Human Rights and the Geneva Refugee Convention. Because I made the observation that many people who were criticizing the border procedures, these asylum border procedures, exclusively focused on detention. That's right, because it's a very harsh thing to detain people.
And because it is administrative detention, not
right.
I mean, there are judges involved. Right. They have to validate this detention, but of course there are other relevant rights and legal issues at stake, of course.
Actually, sometimes the argument goes that, well, if it turns out that a particular measure does not amount to a detention, legally speaking, the discourse pretty much treats this as if member states were free to do whatever they wish, as long as it does not imply detention, de facto or de jure. And this overlooks the fact that there's also a human right that actually protects the interest of freely moving within a country. That's a weaker form of right. There may be conditions attached to that, but my argument will be that we should not forget about these particular human rights to freely move within the country, which, according to my argument, also applies to asylum seekers.
Thank you very much. This highlights how complex is the issue of managing migration flows, which are mixed, in part economic migrants, in part asylum seekers, the problems arising from the adoption of coercive tools from the member states. Thank you very much, Jurgen.
Thank you so much, Jurgen.